This is a story about the haunting of the crying at the edge of Muang Khua village in Laos. At the beginning, in that village, there was one rule after sunset, and every family learned it the hard way. When the crying started at the edge of the forest, nobody opened their doors, nobody looked too long through the cracks in the bamboo walls, and nobody called out the woman's name. The people lowered their cooking fires, pulled their children close, and stayed quiet beneath their blankets because the woman crying in the dark was not lost. She knew the path to every home, and she knew exactly which house she wanted most. Every year, on the same night, she came back to the raised bamboo house where her husband still slept beneath the roof they had built together. The villagers said the crying always began far away, near the black trees beyond the rice fields, but by midnight it sounded as if it was coming from under their own floors. This is the story of the Sayavong family, Sam, Pet, and their little boy, Chan. It is the story of a husband's betrayal, a wife's grief, and a child too young to understand why the dead kept returning to the place where love had failed. In the 1950s, near Muang Khua in northern Laos, there was a small village tucked between green mountains, rice fields, and a forest so thick that even daylight seemed to slow down when it reached the trees. The village was not large. A few raised bamboo homes stood on wooden posts above the earth, and underneath them, families cooked, repaired tools, sorted rice, tied chickens, and rested in the shade when the sun grew too heavy. At night, smoke from cooking fires curled beneath the floors. The smell of sticky rice, river fish, damp wood, and wet soil filled the air. The houses seemed to breathe when the wind moved. Bamboo walls creaked, floors bent, and because the bamboo was never sealed perfectly, every home had thin little cracks where a person could see out into the dark. Back then, people did not fear those cracks. They were simply part of village life, part of the way the home stood above the ground, open to air, weather, insects, and whispers. But after Pet Sayavong died, those cracks became little black eyes in the walls, and no one trusted what might be looking back. The Sayavong home stood near the edge of the village, close enough to hear the forest insects scream at night, and close enough to see the mist roll down from the trees before sunrise. Sam Sayavong was 25 years old, tall, dark, and strong from years of farming. His hands were hard from digging, planting, cutting, and carrying. His wife, Pet, was 21. People remembered her beauty, but not in a proud way. Pet had the kind of beauty that softened a room. She had long dark hair, gentle eyes, and a quiet smile. She moved like someone who did not want to disturb the world, peaceful, loving, and caring. Their son, Chan, was only 3, small and round-cheeked, always following his mother's skirt, always holding the little wooden toy his father had carved from a branch. To the village, the Sayavongs looked like a simple family trying to survive. They farmed, cooked under the house, carried baskets to the fields, and laughed sometimes when Chan chased chickens in circles. From the outside, it looked like a hard life, but a simple, stress-free one. A house can stand high above the ground and still hide something rotten underneath. This is where the nightmare begins. Sam had begun leaving before sunrise and returning after dark. At first, Pet believed him because there was always work to do. Rice did not plant itself, fences did not fix themselves, and a man could disappear into labor and come back too tired to speak. But then came the smell. It was not smoke, not soil, and not river mud. It was a flower smell, sweet, bright, and strange, and it clung to Sam's shirt. Pet noticed it when she washed his clothes in the water basin. She noticed the way he stopped looking directly at her, how he ate quietly, how his answers grew shorter, and how he touched Chan's head but no longer reached for her hand. Every betrayal begins before it is spoken. It begins in the small spaces between two people. It begins when one person reaches across the sleeping mat at night and finds nothing there but cold. There was another woman. No one in the village wanted to say her name later. Some claimed she lived in another settlement downriver. Some said she was a widow. Some said she was younger than Pet. Some said Sam had promised her that he would leave his family and begin again. But truth does not need every detail to destroy a life. Pet knew. A wife knows when the man who shares her roof has already moved his spirit somewhere else. For days, she said nothing. She kept cooking, kept washing, and kept carrying Chan on her hip. She walked past the women pounding rice as if her heart was not breaking inside her chest. But grief has a sound even before it becomes crying. The old women heard it in the way Pet stopped singing under the house. Chan heard it in the way his mother held him too tightly at night. And Sam heard it one evening when he came home late and found Pet sitting in the dark, not by the fire, not by the food, but beside the ladder that led up into their raised home. No argument filled the village that night. There was no shouting, no broken bowls, and no screaming for neighbors to hear. That is what made it worse. There were only low voices beneath the bamboo floor, Pet asking the question that had been sitting inside her like a knife, Sam refusing to answer, Pet asking again, and Sam looking away. Then came the final cruelty, the sentence that walked through the bamboo walls and stayed there forever. Sam wanted to leave, not that night, not yet, but soon. A man can kill without touching a blade. Sometimes all he has to do is remove himself from the life he promised to protect. That night, Chan cried himself to sleep. Sam slept facing the wall, and Pet did not sleep at all. Before dawn, the mist came low across the village. The chickens had not yet started calling, and the cooking fires had not been lit. In the gray hour between night and morning, when the whole village still belonged to dreams, Pet walked down from the sleeping room and into the quiet beneath the raised house. What happened there was spoken of carefully for the rest of that village's life. No one wanted to describe it. No one needed to. It was enough to say that Pet ended her life by hanging beneath the home where she had cooked, laughed, waited, and loved. When Sam found her, the sound he made woke every dog in the village. After that morning, the Sayavong house was never only a house again. It became a wound standing on stilts. Grief changed Sam faster than age ever could. In the days after Pet's death, his back bent, his eyes sank, and he stopped going to the fields unless someone forced him. He stopped eating unless Chan pushed rice into his hand. The other woman never came. Maybe she heard what happened. Maybe she was ashamed. Maybe Sam sent word that he could not leave anymore. No one cared. The village cared only for Chan, because a motherless child does not understand death. Chan searched for Pet in the cooking place. He looked behind baskets, near the water jars, and up through the bamboo floor into the sleeping room. At night, he woke reaching for someone who was not there. Sam held him and shook silently. People told Sam to move. The elders warned him that a death like Pet's did not leave cleanly. A woman who dies sick, old, or naturally may follow the road prepared for the dead, but a woman who leaves in grief, with pain still burning inside her, may not know where to go. Sam refused to leave. Maybe guilt held him there. Maybe love arrived too late and chained him to the house. Maybe punishment feels like home when a man knows he deserves it. For 7 nights, nothing happened, and the village began to breathe again. On the 8th night, rain came. Not heavy rain, just thin, cold rain tapping the bamboo roof and sliding through the cracks. It was the kind of rain that made dogs curl beneath houses and made children sleep deeper. Sam lay beside Chan in the sleeping room. The cooking fire below had burned low, and the whole house smelled of wet bamboo. Then, beneath the floor, came the first sound. A soft scrape moved across the dirt. Sam opened his eyes and listened. The scrape came again, slow and dragging, like someone moving a basket under the house. He sat up, holding his breath. The sound stopped, Chan slept, and rain whispered on the roof. Sam waited so long his legs began to ache. Then, directly below him, from the cooking place, came the soft clink of a clay bowl. Sam's body went cold. No one should have been there. The ladder had been pulled up, the dogs were silent, and the whole village had gone dark. He reached for the small knife beside his mat, not because a knife could help him, but because the living always reach for living things. Below the floor, something moved carefully around the exact place where Pet used to cook. It did not sound like walking, and it did not sound like an animal. It sounded like someone remembering where everything belonged. Then came the smell, not rot, not death, but smoke, rice, and the faint scent of the oil Pet used in her hair. Chan stirred. His little voice rose from sleep, soft and happy. "Mother." Sam grabbed him, and the house went silent. Not quiet, silent, as if even the rain had stopped falling. Then a hand touched the bamboo floor from underneath. Sam did not see the hand at first. He saw only the darkness between the bamboo slats change shape. Then a pale press of fingers appeared through one of the cracks. One finger first, then another, bent upward from below, testing the floor, feeling for the people above it. Sam could not move. The fingers slid away, and a bowl rolled under the house in one slow circle across the dirt. Then a woman began to cry. She was not far away. She was not in the forest. She was right beneath them. The crying was low at first, wet and broken, like someone trying not to wake a child. Sean reached toward the floor, but Sam pulled him back so hard the boy began to sob. The crying below them stopped. Then Pet's voice came through the bamboo. It was not loud. It was not angry. It was wounded, and that made it worse. The voice formed Sam's name only once, and Sam did what every guilty man does when the dead speak. He covered his ears. By morning, all the bowls under the house had been stacked neatly beside the cold ashes. Pet used to stack them that way. That was how the haunting began, not with blood, not with screaming, but with housework, memory, and the dead returning to the shape of the life that had betrayed her. At first, the village believed Pet haunted only the Sayavong house. They were wrong. A spirit bound by grief does not always stay where the body fell. It follows sound, it follows guilt, and it follows every person who heard pain and chose not to answer. The first neighbor to see her was an old woman named May Noi. She lived 2 houses away and rose before dawn to light her fire. That morning, she looked through a crack in her bamboo wall and saw Pet standing beneath the Sayavong home. Pet was not hanging. She was not broken. She was standing with her hair loose around her face, her feet not touching the dirt, and her hands hanging at her sides as if she were still holding something invisible. May Noi wanted to call out. Then Pet turned her head. The old woman saw that Pet's eyes were open too wide. They were not angry. They were searching. Somehow that was worse. May Noi dropped to the floor and crawled away from the wall like a child. By afternoon, the story had spread. By evening, no one admitted they believed it. That is how villages survive fear. They laugh at it in daylight. Then darkness comes, and every laugh becomes a lock on the door. 3 nights later, the crying came from the forest. At first it sounded like wind, then like a woman mourning, and then like Pet. It rose from the edge of the trees where the narrow path led to the fields, floated between the bamboo homes, and settled against every wall. Dogs tucked their tails and hid. Babies woke screaming. Men who had fought wild boar, storms, fever, and hunger stood frozen with their hands on their doors. The crying grew louder, not because she came closer, but because the sound seemed to enter the houses. Pet's crying pressed through the bamboo cracks, slipped under sleeping mats, and trembled inside water jars. Every family did the same thing without being told. Doors shut, windows were tied, children were pulled close, mothers covered mouths, and fathers sat awake with knives, charms, beads, and shame. Inside the Sayavong house, Sam held Chan against his chest while the crying circled them. The boy was not afraid in the way the adults were. He listened. Sometimes he smiled, sometimes he cried, and sometimes he whispered to the dark as if answering someone no one else could hear. That was what frightened Sam most. Not Pet's crying, but Chan's calm, because a child does not fear a mother's voice, even when that voice comes from the forest after death. The haunting changed with the moon. Some nights, the village heard bare feet walking beneath their raised homes. Some nights, women woke to find their cooking pots arranged in Pet's careful way. Some nights, someone heard a baby being soothed outside the wall, a soft humming that stopped the moment anyone listened too closely. One farmer swore he saw Pet in a rice field at dawn, bending over the young shoots as if planting. But when the mist lifted, every rice stalk in that patch had been pulled gently from the mud and laid in rows, neat and silent. Another family found wet footprints beneath their house, though no rain had fallen. Small footprints were beside them, a child's steps beside a mother's steps, but Chan had been asleep in Sam's arms the whole night. The village began to fear sleep. It began to fear kindness. Sometimes Pet did not appear as a monster. Sometimes she appeared as a wife still trying to finish her work, and that made people pity her. Pity is dangerous when the dead are listening. One night, a young woman heard crying outside and whispered through the bamboo, "Pet, go rest." The crying stopped. Her husband grabbed her and covered her mouth, but it was already too late. Something touched the wall, 3 gentle taps, and then Pet's voice came close enough to breathe through the crack. Open. The young woman fainted. By morning, her bamboo wall had finger marks pressed into it from outside, deep marks, as if the dead had tried to push her way in. After that, nobody spoke when the crying started. Nobody prayed loudly. Nobody whispered comfort. Nobody used Pet's name after sunset. Village Chief Shantalangzi tried to hold the people together. He was broad, stern, and respected, and his house stood near the center of the village, with old charms tied to the posts and a gong hanging beneath the floor. He told the villagers not to panic. He told them grief must be honored. He told them the dead can become confused when the living feed them fear. But even Chantalangzi closed his door before the sun touched the hills. Every year, on the anniversary of Pet's death, the haunting grew worse. The first anniversary came with no moon. The village knew the day before it arrived because all the cooking fires went out at once. It was not wind, and it was not rain. One moment the fires burned, and the next, every flame bent low and died. Then the crying began from beneath the Sayavong home, from the forest, from the rice field, from the river path, and from everywhere at once. By the first anniversary of Pet's death, Sam had grown thin, and gray had begun to show at his temples even though he was not yet 30. Chan was 4, old enough to know people avoided his house, old enough to know his father cried at night, and old enough to understand that he should not tell other children his mother visited him in dreams. On that anniversary night, Sam tied the door shut. He placed Chan in the far corner of the sleeping room, lit incense, pressed his palms together, and begged forgiveness from every spirit he knew. But guilt does not become prayer just because hands are folded. At midnight, something climbed the ladder. It was the same ladder Sam had pulled inside and laid across the floor. Still, the bamboo steps creaked one by one, as if someone invisible were rising from the earth. Sam stared at the doorway. The door did not open, and the latch did not move, but the sound kept climbing, one step, then another, then another. Chan began to whimper. A shadow appeared on the wall, but not outside. Inside. Long hair, bent head, a woman's shape. Sam turned slowly, and Pet stood behind him. Her face was almost as it had been in life, but grief had hollowed it into something older than death. Her eyes were dark wells, and her mouth trembled as if she wanted to speak but had forgotten how to be human. Chan reached for her. Sam caught his son's wrist. The spirit's face changed. It was not rage. It was pain. The house shook. Every bamboo strip in the wall began to rattle. Baskets fell, the water jar cracked, and the cooking pots below slammed into each other. Across the village, people heard Sam scream Pet's name, and then everything stopped. At dawn, Chantalangzi entered the Sayavong house with 3 elders. Sam was found curled around Chan in the corner, alive, but the wall behind them was covered in marks. Not writing, not symbols, only small scratches, hundreds of them, like fingernails counting days. From that morning on, the village knew Pet was not fading. She was waiting, and every year she remembered more. After the 3rd anniversary, the village began to break. Families talked of leaving, and some did. They packed baskets, tied chickens, lifted children onto backs, and walked downriver. But not all could go. Rice fields do not follow people. Ancestor altars do not move easily. The old cannot cross mountains simply because the dead cry at night. And Sam would not leave. By then, Chan was 6, quiet and thin, with eyes too serious for a child. He no longer played near the forest, and he no longer asked where his mother was. But sometimes, under the Sayavong house, he arranged little stones in circles. When Sam asked why, the boy looked toward the trees and said his mother did not like straight roads anymore. Those words finally drove Chantalangzi to act. The village chief sent a messenger to a distant temple to summon Ajahn. Ajahn was an elder 70-year-old Lao Buddhist elder who wore a dark orange robe faded by smoke, sun, and years of year. Some called him a god monk. Some called him a holy man. Some simply called him the one who could speak where living mouths could not. He arrived near sunset, and that alone frightened the village, because no wise traveler entered that place near dark anymore. Ajahn came walking with a wooden staff, a small cloth bag, and eyes that did not seem surprised by anything. His robe moved like fire through the gray evening. Children watched from behind their mothers. Men lowered their heads. Chantalangzi greeted him at the center of the village and explained everything: the affair, Pet's grief, her death, the crying, the anniversary, the marks on the walls, and the way Chan listened to the forest as if it spoke inside his bones. Ajahn listened without interruption. When the chief finished, the old master looked toward the Sayavong house. The sun was sinking behind it, and the empty space beneath the raised floor was already dark. Ajahn's face became heavy, not afraid, but burdened. The village waited for him to promise peace. He did not. Instead, he warned them that a spirit who dies from sorrow and violence against the self may not understand the road forward. Such a spirit can cling to love, anger, shame, and the place of death. Pet was not only haunting the village, she was trapped inside the moment her heart broke. That was why she returned every year, not only to punish them, but to be seen, to be answered, and to be released from the second death of being ignored. That night, Ajahn refused to sleep inside any house. He sat beneath the Sayavong home, in the place where Pet had died. Som begged him not to. The villagers begged him not to. Even Shantalangzi lowered his voice and asked the master to wait until morning. Ajahn placed his bag on the ground, lit 3 candles, set a bowl of water beside them, and tied white cotton threads around his wrist. Then he looked at Som and told him the truth all cowards fear. No year could release Pet if the wound that held her here remained hidden. Som would have to face her, not as a victim, not as a grieving husband, but as the man who broke the vow. The village gathered in a wide circle before dark, but when the first insect cry rose from the forest, people retreated to their houses. Only Shantalangzi stayed near. Only Som stayed because he was ordered to. Only Chan stayed because Ajahn would not allow the boy to be taken away. The child sat beside the master, calm and watchful. Night came, and the village sealed itself. Doors were tied, windows were covered, and families ducked beneath blankets, shaking in heat. Ajahn began to chant. His voice was low, not loud enough to fight the dark, only steady enough to stand inside it. The candles burned without flicker. The bowl of water reflected the bamboo floor above. Som knelt with his face wet. Chan held his wooden toy. Then the crying started. The crying began far away, at the forest edge, but the familiar sound rolled through the village until every house seemed to stiffen around it. Ajahn kept chanting. The crying moved closer. Dogs whimpered but did not bark. A wind passed through the village, though not a single leaf moved, and the candles bent toward the forest as if they were listening. Chan looked up. A woman's silhouette stood at the tree line. But the first time Ajahn saw her, he did not call her a demon. He bowed his head, chanted, and that small act changed the air. For years, everyone had run from her. For years, everyone had shut doors, hidden faces, and swallowed her name. But Ajahn bowed, sat and chanted, and the crying immediately slowed. Then it stopped. The silence afterward was worse. Pet began to move toward the village, not in a normal way, not step by step like a living person crossing the ground. She seemed to arrive in pieces, closer each time someone blinked. One moment she was at the tree line, half hidden by the dark leaves. The next moment she was on the rice path, with mist curling around her feet. Then she was beside the first house, then near the water jars, then at the Sayavong ladder, and finally beneath the raised floor, directly in front of Som. At that moment, all 3 candles turned blue. Som fell backward, choking on his own breath. Pet's spirit stood where she had ended her life. Her feet hovered above the dirt, and her hair floated around her face, though there was no wind. Her eyes did not look at the village. They looked only at Som. Ajah's chant deepened. He dipped his fingers into the bowl of water and touched Chan's forehead. The boy began to cry silently, not from fear, but from recognition. The spirit turned toward her son, and for one moment, Pet's face softened into the woman she had been. She was the mother, the wife, the young woman who had once laughed under the raised house while steam rose from rice and Chan chased chickens through the smoke. Then grief returned, like a shadow passing over the moon. The bamboo floor above them began to creak. Every crack in the house opened with tiny popping sounds. The walls exhaled dust, and the old scratch marks appeared again, darker now, carved deep into the bamboo from the inside. Ajahn lifted his staff and struck the dirt once. The sound was not loud, but it seemed to travel beneath every house in the village. He began the crossing. That was how Shantalangzi described it years later. It was not sleep, and it was not a trance. It was a crossing. Ajah's body remained seated beneath the house, but something in him stepped away. His breathing slowed until it became almost nothing. His head bowed, and his shadow stretched behind him, longer than the candles could explain. Shantalangzi saw the old master's shadow rise on the bamboo wall. Then another shadow rose beside it, Pet's shadow. Between those 2 shadows, a path appeared where no path had been, a dark road made of smoke, river mist, and old sorrow. Ajahn had ported himself over, not with his body, but with spirit, into the place where Pet had been trapped. There are places the living should not see, and Ajahn saw one that night. He later spoke of it only once, and even then, he spoke with his eyes lowered. He said Pet's spirit was not standing in the village the way everyone believed. She was standing in the last moment of her life, over and over again, beneath the house before dawn, waiting for someone to stop her. She was waiting for Sam to wake, waiting for Chan to cry, and waiting for the world to change its mind. But the dead cannot change what the living allowed to happen. So she repeated the pain year after year, night after night. Every cry from the forest was not meant only to scare them. It was the sound of Pet realizing again that nobody was coming. Ajahn walked that dark road toward her. The road had no sky and no stars. There were only hanging roots, bamboo shadows, and the distant sound of Chan as a baby laughing somewhere that could not be reached. Pet stood ahead of him in the mist. She was not monstrous, and she was not peaceful. She looked like half woman and half wound. Behind her were doors. Many doors. One led to the Sayavong house, one led to the forest, one led to the river, and one led to a pale light that seemed too far away for her to find. But Pet would not walk toward the light. She kept turning back to the house, to Sam, to Chan, and to the life that had rejected her, then begged her to disappear quietly. Ajahn did not command her at first. He listened. That was the first mercy. The village had been afraid of her grief because grief is ugly when it has nowhere to go. Ajahn let it speak, and in the world beneath the world, Pet's crying became memories. Sam leaving before dawn. Sam washing flowers sent from his neck. Pet holding Chan while pretending not to know. Pet sitting alone beneath the raised floor with uncooked rice in her hands because she could not remember why she had picked it up. Pet hearing Sam admit his heart had gone elsewhere. Pet feeling that the whole village knew, but no one helped her. Not one memory excused her death, but every memory explained the chain around her spirit. Back in the living world, the villagers heard voices moving through the bamboo cracks. They were not words anyone could understand. They were feelings, regret, betrayal, and a loneliness so deep that mothers reached for their children in the dark, and husbands lowered their heads in shame though they had done nothing. Sam was shaking so violently that Chantalangzi had to hold his shoulders. The village chief forced him to look at Pet's spirit, not at the ground, not at Chan, but at her. Ajahn's voice came from far away and from right in front of them at the same time. Sam had to speak. Sam had to open the wound with truth. Not excuses, not grief, but truth. Sam crawled forward on his knees. The villagers watched from cracks in their walls, even though they had sworn not to look. Fear and sorrow pulled their eyes open. Sam bowed until his forehead touched the dirt. His apology came broken, but the words were finally true. He admitted the affair. He admitted it was his fault. He admitted that he saw Pet's pain and chose silence, because silence was easier than mercy. He admitted that after she died, part of him grieved because he loved her, but another part grieved because guilt overtook him. The truth struck the village harder than thunder. Pet's spirit trembled, the bamboo posts of the Sayavong house groaned, and Chan began to sob. It was not loud. It was the soft, helpless sob of a child who understood only that his mother and father were both crying, and neither could fix the other. Then Pet moved. For the first time in years, she did not drift toward Sam in anger. She moved toward Chan. Ajahn raised his hand, warning everyone not to touch the boy. The spirit knelt before her son. Her face changed again. The hollow darkness in her eyes softened, and the long grief loosened. Chan lifted his wooden toy. The toy Sam had carved and Pet used to tuck beside him when he slept. He held it out to the empty air. Pet's fingers passed through it, but the toy rocked gently in Chan's palm, as if someone had touched it. The whole village heard her voice then, not from the forest, not from under the house, but from inside every home at once. She called Chan her little moon. She asked him to grow, live the way he wanted to live. She asked him not to follow her crying, not to grieve for her anymore. She asked him to remember her before the sorrow. Remember your mom as a good mother. Then she turned to Sam. The spirit and the husband faced each other beneath the house where their life had ended before her body did. There are apologies that repair, and there are apologies that come too late. Sam's apology was too late to save Pet, but not too late to release her from suffering, from waiting with a constant repeat year after year. He raised his head. His face was covered in dirt and tears. He told her he was sorry. He told her he had been weak. He told her he had mistaken desire for freedom and silence for kindness. He told her he had killed their home before she died. No one in the village moved. No one breathed loudly. Even the insects stopped. Pet reached toward him. Sam flinched, but he did not run. Her hand softly touched his face, not flesh to flesh, but cold to guilt. Sam gasped as if river water had entered his lungs. For one moment, he saw what she had carried, not only anger, but love, humiliation, fear for Chan, the loneliness of sleeping beside someone whose spirit had already left, and the terrible last thought that nobody would miss her until morning. Sam collapsed, but he did not look away. That was the price. Ajan's chant changed. The white threads around his wrist began to lift, though there was no wind, and the bowl of water rippled beside him. Inside the water, Chantalangzi saw the reflection of a path opening beyond the forest, lined with small flames like candles floating in rain. Ajan spoke to Pet with tenderness and authority. Because her death had not been natural, because her grief had tied itself to anger, and because her own act had broken the road before her, she could not simply return to the cycle as if nothing had happened. There would be service. There would be waiting. There would be year. She would walk under Buddha's mercy until her karma was complete. But she would no longer be alone beneath the house, and she would no longer have to cry at the forest edge for people too afraid to answer. Pet's face twisted. For one moment, the haunting fought to remain. The crying exploded through the village. Doors shook, children screamed beneath blankets, cooking pots flew from shelves, and bamboo walls bent inward. Every crack in every house filled with darkness, and through those cracks, people saw one eye looking in. Pet's pain had become so large that it did not know how to leave without taking the village with it. Ajan chanted further, struck the ground with his staff a second time. The sound split the night. The candles rose straight, the smoke pulled upward in a pillar, and the master called not to the ghost, but to the woman inside it. Pet Sayavong, a wife, a mother, a daughter, and a human soul. Beloved before she was feared. The crying broke. It did not simply stop. It broke and shattered into sobs. Every person in the village began to weep. Not because they wanted to, but because for the first time, Pet's sorrow was no longer outside their doors. It was inside their hearts. They felt the pain. They felt the deep sorrow. Old men wept into their hands. Women held each other. Children cried without knowing why. Chantalangzi, who had stood strong through famine, fever, and death, covered his face and shook. Sam crawled to Chan and held him. Pet's spirit hovered before them, fading and returning, as if she were being pulled by two worlds. Sam and Pet said goodbye without touching. Their farewell was not clean. It was not beautiful in the way stories pretend grief is beautiful. It was ugly, wet-faced, trembling, and human. It was a husband finally seeing the woman he had abandoned. It was a wife finally hearing the apology she had died waiting for. It was a child holding a wooden toy between two worlds. Pet's final look at Sam was not forgiveness, not fully. Forgiveness is not always a door that opens all at once. Sometimes it is only a hand releasing the rope. But she released something. The house stopped shaking. The scratch marks on the wall faded from black to brown. The cold lifted. The forest became only a forest again. Ajan raised the bowl of water and poured it onto the dirt. The water did not spread. It sank straight down, as if the earth had been thirsty for years. Pet's spirit turned toward the path of small flames. Before Pet left, she looked once more at the village, looked closely to her loving son, her husband, and everybody she held dear. Every door was open now. Every family had come out. No one hid from her. No one looked away. The woman who had terrified them for years was finally witnessed by the people who had survived her grief. Then she walked into the candlelit mist. The small flames closed behind her, and the crying stopped. Morning came slowly. Nobody slept. The village stayed outside until the sky turned pale over the mountains. Ajan remained beneath the Sayavong house with his eyes closed, breathing so softly that Chantalangzi feared the old master had given too much of himself to the crossing. At sunrise, Ajan opened his eyes. He looked older, much older, but alive. Sam could not stand. Chan slept against his father's lap, still holding the wooden toy. The village waited for Ajan to speak, and he gave them instructions. The Sayavong house had to be cleansed, not destroyed and not abandoned. Cleansed. The house itself had unfinished business. Evil has overtaken it. It had been witness. The villagers washed the posts, replaced broken bamboo, burned old mats, and tied white threads around the ladder. They prepared food, not as fear offering to a monster, but as remembrance for a woman who had once cooked for them, smiled at them, farmed together, and carried water beside them. Sam worked with them. No one comforted him too easily, and that was important. Guilt should not be worshipped just because it cries, but neither should it be left alone long enough to become another ghost. In the weeks that followed, the village changed. Men came home earlier from the fields. Women no longer let another woman's silence pass without asking what hurt. Doors still closed at night, but not with the same panic. Children played again beneath the houses, dogs barked at normal things, and the forest edge became dark again, but not hungry. Sam raised Chong quietly. He never remarried. Some say he wore a white thread around his wrist until the day he died. Some say every year, on the anniversary, he walked alone to the forest edge before sunset, placed rice on a banana leaf, bowed, and returned before dark. The crying never came back, not like before. There were no more voices in the cracks, no more bowls stacking themselves, no more wet footprints beneath dry houses, and no more anniversary terror. The village healed the way villages do, not by forgetting, but by learning which stories must be told carefully. Years passed. Chong grew older. Shantalangzi became an old man. Ajahn returned to his temple and never again spoke in detail about the path beneath the Sayavong house and never seen again. There was one bamboo strip in the Sayavong wall that no one could repair for long. It was the strip near the sleeping corner where Chan had once reached for his mother. Pressed into it was a small mark, not a scratch, not a crack, but a handprint. A woman's hand, Pet's hand. No matter how many times Sam replaced that part of the wall, the mark returned by morning. Always in the same place, always the same shape, as if the house itself remembered the last touch of the woman who had once lived there. The elders said it was not a haunting anymore. They said it was memory, a mother's last blessing, a warning to husbands, and a wound the house refused to hide. But old villagers know the difference between peace and silence. Sometimes on certain wet mornings, when mist comes down from the mountains and the forest disappears behind white air, people passing the old Sayavong place still walk a little faster. Not because they hear crying. They do not. That ended long ago. They walk faster because, through the cracks in that bamboo wall, they sometimes feel someone watching. Not angry, not lost. Only waiting, as if making sure the living remember what happens when love is betrayed, grief is ignored, and a woman's pain is left alone under a house until it learns how to call the whole village by name. And that is why, even now, some families near Muang Khua still tell their children, when night falls, do not look too long through the bamboo cracks. Some houses do not forget, and some goodbyes keep breathing after the dead have gone. Years after Sam died, Chan returned to the village as an old man. He walked slowly with a cane, carrying the same wooden toy his father had carved when he was small. The toy had darkened with age, but Chan still remembered the night his mother had reached for it, and how it had moved in his hand when no living person touched it. He stood beneath the Sayavong house for a long time. The village had changed, and many of the old people were gone, but the house still smelled faintly of bamboo, smoke, and rain. Chan placed the wooden toy beneath the floor, exactly where his mother used to cook, then bowed his head and left before sunset. By morning, the toy was found inside the sleeping room. It was clean, it was dry, and beside it, resting on the bamboo floor, was one fresh strand of long black hair. No one in the village cried out when they saw it. No one ran. No one even spoke Pet's name. They only closed the door gently, stepped away from the wall, and listened for a sound that never came. The village was quiet, but the house remembered.